I'm Dan Brown and I live on board a narrowboat, and in this episode of Dan's Narrowboat Life, we're going to be talking about winter. Yes, it can certainly be an absolutely beautiful time of year, and it's always good to be able to spend long cold winter's nights huddled up cosily in front of a roaring fire, but my goodness me, there's far more to narrowboat life over the cold months than those classic stereotypical images. We've got an awful lot to talk about, and many different areas that you may not think about as obvious winter considerations. So without further ado, let's dive straight into Dan's Narrowboat Life. Winter on board a narrowboat is one of those times a year that you can face several different extremes in rapid succession. And what I mean by that is that one moment you could be sat on the boat and you could be nice and toasty in front of the fire thinking, oh yeah, this is perfect. And then when you stand up and take a look through the window, you might even look out on a lovely snow-covered scene of countryside for miles on end, and everything will be lovely and perfect and as stereotypically narrowboaty and wintry as you could imagine. Equally, you could also find yourself waking up in the middle of the small hours of the morning, say 4 to 5 a.m, as has happened to me in the past, discover that the fire is burnt out long ago and everything is absolutely freezing. You can see your breath, there might be condensation starting to form on the windows and maybe even on the ceiling in some extreme cases, and then if you have a look through the window, you might still have a wonderful snow-covered wintry scene out there, but stepping up onto the stern and finding every metal piece of anything covered in ice, whether that's the tiller, whether that's the general boat itself, or even the bike that you've got to sit on and then ride into town for work, you might then be thinking, what on earth am I doing in my life? So those are obviously two extreme examples, but I've certainly seen my fair share of both of those type of incidents happening, and it's certainly something that throws in a bit of variety and sometimes tests your mettle a little bit. But ultimately, as I've said in many videos, there's so many different variations and so many ways of living on a narrowboat and being hands-on or hands-off or spending a lot of money or trying to save money, that winter is another one of those areas where you can really sort of customise it and get into a groove over the years of you living on board a boat to really find a way to do it that suits you and is your way of living on a boat at winter. Anyway, we're just going to have a quick chat and a general look at some of the things that you've got to think about over the winter months, because it's not all about just putting wood and coal in the fire. There's a lot of other things to think about, such as actually getting out there and moving the boat during the winter period. Now, it's not something that may be the first thing that jumps to your mind when you think about narrowboat life during the winter. It might not be something that you really give a second thought, but it definitely deserves a little bit of thought and preparation for potential issues that might arise. Firstly, it's easy to look and think, oh, winter, that might be a decent time to get out on the boat. If the summer holiday traffic has died down and you get the canal sometimes, especially on the Llangollen, almost entirely to yourself, it seems. And on a day like today, the 1st of November, the first official day of the winter mooring period, it can certainly seem absolutely perfect, where you've got lovely sun giving a very nice orangey hint to everything and no boats in sight and just a lovely quiet canal to go travelling on. However, obviously the first thing to consider is the weather itself, which obviously isn't always this good over the winter. Potentially, on some canals, you've got the issue of freezing, which is obviously going to stop you absolutely in your tracks until the canal unfreezes in some cases, or it certainly could give you a lot of grief and slow you down an awful lot. Potentially, though, there's a lot more issues other than just simple frost and snow and ice. You've obviously got the potential for high winds over autumn and through the winter itself, as you have all year round, I suppose, which, of course, in extreme wind conditions, you don't necessarily want to be moving about very far, if at all. And certainly, in my case, I try to avoid passing any moored up boats in high wind conditions. I've had some close calls in the past, but in general, I try to not move at all over the winter period. As you can see, we're going very close here. I had the tripod right on the roof and raised up just low enough to be able to squeeze under the bridge there. And again, a day like today can make you think, moving at winter, what more is there to worry about than how nice it's going to be? But something that's equally something that you need to consider over the autumn in particular is the amount of leaves in the canal, which as you're travelling along start to collect up around the propeller, which then slows the boat and starts making the engine do an awful lot more work and just generally stressing and straining the engine beyond standard use, which you then have to quickly put it into reverse. And then if you look behind, obviously the water's a lot clearer without so many boats churning up the mud. You can see loads of leaves all sort of spray out under the water through the back. So that's another thing, just a general tip there for you that I thought I'd mention in passing. Equally, you've got the potential in extreme weather conditions for the snow to bring trees down across the canal. So on a canal like the Llangollen, with a relatively fast water flow of around 4 miles an hour or so, that doesn't tend to freeze over, but I've still found myself in my first ever winter on board 2 years ago trapped at the far side of Chirk, which wasn't a place I really wanted to be trapped at all, because there was a huge amount of trees all over the canal. At the start of this video, I referred to the winter mooring period, and if you're unfamiliar with winter mooring, then basically over a 5-month period from November through to March, you can purchase from the Canal and River Trust a licence which allows you to stay in one area for longer than the standard continuous cruising rule of staying in one area for an absolute maximum of 14 days. These can be bought for varying lengths of time, and there's various types. Some of them are location based, where you're effectively buying a mooring at a certain spot, or there's the type that I personally use and think is fantastic, which is the general towpath permit. Now there's various exceptions and rules that are associated with this, such as not mooring up within a certain distance of a marina. I'll post a link to the Canal and River Trust website that details properly what these rules are in length. But basically it allows me to moor up in certain areas for as long as I want over that 5-month period, and they're charged on a per metre basis, which for my little boat again keeps costs relatively low. I think that this year it was between £225 and £230 for the entire 5-month period. You could choose to spend your winter in a proper marina, which would likely cost you a little bit more than the general towpath permit. But again, it's having that flexibility that I really like about the towpath permit, because it allows me to stay in sometimes at areas like I'm at now around the Chirk area, and also move down for a week or two every now and then over that 5 months to other areas of the canal in this general region, which again, it's flexibility and simplicity that I'm a big fan of. Now, one of the things that you've obviously got to think about if you are planning on stopping on your boat in a certain area on one of these permits is, are you going to have good access to get to and from the boat, or to and from towns or villages to get supplies, and all of those sorts of things. So, for example, where I am now, I'm well aware and well prepared to deal with the fact that the towpath is likely to get extremely muddy over the next few months. I've got my bike on the back and my boots and various changes of clothes and waterproof, so I'm more than happy to take that risk and deal with the consequences when the weather does get extremely bad. But obviously that's not for some people, because the last thing you want to do at the end of the day and at the end of a work day such as today that you're joining me on board with is drag a load of mud onto the back of the boat and then fetch it down and walk it into the carpet and all those sorts of things. Things like bus routes are very key to me personally, because I like to get to various local places such as Oswestry and Wrexham, and even out to other areas like Shrewsbury, or over the winter I like to go walking out down the Welsh hills around Llangollen. So mooring up in certain areas, I can walk up to a bus stop in a couple of minutes and soon be on my way to one of these places, whether to get supplies and food or go to my friends' houses. And if it's icy and frosty and it's not really suitable to get on my bike, then obviously it's very important to be able to have that access. There are often over the winter works and general stoppages on the canal where, for example, this year it's the 2014 into 2015 winter. The tunnels just up that way and maybe 2 miles of canal up that way are going to be closed in literally 2 days from me recording this video. So obviously that way I won't be able to go any further. So I'm stuck on this side, which I'm more than happy to be. But then next month, as well as those tunnels being closed, there's going to be closures and the canal drained in small places in that direction. So am I going to be stuck in the middle? Shall I dive down there and get myself safely over on the other side so I can do a bit more travelling if the mood takes me? I'll see how I feel at the time. But again, if I was planning on coming up here, say, and moving all the way to Llangollen next month, then I would have absolutely no luck at all, because the tunnels would still be closed and you would have absolutely no chance to pass them. One of the most important things to do on board over winter is keep your leisure batteries topped up, and there's a very important reason for that. On many boats, Tilly included, the lights that you can see here built in, the main lighting is run off the leisure batteries. And as we look around on board, seeing how dark it is, this is only 5 PM and you can see through the window just how dark it's getting outside. So obviously, over these winter months with the long, cold, dark nights, I'm using the lighting an awful lot more, which in turn is then using up the batteries a lot quicker and obviously dwindling that charge down to some points in the past where I have indeed seen the lights start to dim and flicker and in some cases go out altogether. So keeping on top of that is very important, that you don't end up living in the dark for a night or two. The way that Tilly charges her batteries is just off the engine as it runs, so I need to put it in neutral every now and then just to top up the charge. The lighting that you're currently seeing at the front is all just simple 72 LED battery operated lights, which you can see that I've got tucked in on under the gunnel there, and those light up my desk nicely. So those, as they're very specialist to giving me good light for working and writing in, and obviously completely separate to the mains lighting system, and those basically over the winter just cost me an awful lot more in AA batteries and don't really interrupt the general boat itself. But again, over the summer months, I can literally go for weeks without turning a light on, because Tilly has got these huge windows everywhere you look. They let an awful lot of light in, and there's not much, well, when we look out there, you can imagine if this was a nice sunny evening, there would be plenty of light pouring in still. But again, these are things that are very specific to Tilly, although the leisure batteries operating things like the fridges, any electrical sockets that you may have, and of course the proper built-in mains lighting are all things that you might find common across many boats indeed. But what about if you want to leave your boat for a while and go off on holiday, or even leave your boat for a long period over the winter? There's a lot of things to think about in general, whether it's summer, winter, autumn or spring when you leave a boat for a long time. But over the winter there's additional things to consider, such as the rain and snow and potential of a lot of water coming down on the boat and getting in through little cracks. And as you can see here, we've got the big open stern on the back of Tilly, which I put a tarpaulin down, which then helps to keep the water and the rain from going straight down into the general bilge area below the engine, which is obviously very handy to do, and it stops you getting months worth of rain building up, and in some cases boats will sink over the winter months. Equally, on the front of Tilly, I do have another cratch material cover which can cover this entire area and keep my wood and the coal and things like that dry. But at the moment I'm enjoying just being able to look out of the front windows and enjoy the general view. It's something that's also important to note, that if it's going to be extremely cold, you may wish to stop the flow of water in the water system in the boat and drain it through the taps, so that you've hopefully got as little possibility of any pipes bursting as you can make. You're joining me on board Tilly today on a very cold October morning. It's about 9:30 as I'm recording this, and I've already been out and had a nice little boat trip for about 20 minutes or so, just enough to get a bit further up the canal and a little bit closer to a main road, so I'm not having to go too far up and down a muddy towpath now that the wet weather is really starting to set in. And of course, the last thing you want to do after you've been out at work all day is go down a muddy towpath and then step straight onto your boat and drag all of that on with you. But as you can imagine, being a cold day to start with, and then standing out on the stern of a boat for 20 minutes, not doing anything to warm yourself up, it does get pretty chilly in this weather. Which is a rather handy way that I can segue into talking about the fire. The whole video has been leading up to this moment, so let's dive in. Not literally, of course. So here is my rather odd little boat fire, which might not be at all what you were expecting. As you can see, it's a custom-made cylinder, which somebody who had the boat before me has obviously created and put on board themselves. You've got a little ashtray at the bottom, which is also what you use to restrict the flow of air to obviously let the fire get more or less oxygen. And then it is a top-loading fire with this central hole here that you use to obviously put in more fuel and wood or coal. Then that larger ring there also comes out and is just the right size to be able to put a little pan on there or a kettle, and those are very handy little things to be able to do, because obviously over the winter months there's an awful lot of use of the fire. So if you've got a huge heat source already, then you might as well put a kettle on or a little pan of soup or anything just to get even more efficiency out of whatever you're burning. When it comes to actually getting the fire going and getting some heat into the boat, once again, as I started this video by talking about the way that you sort of learn your rhythm and learn your way of living on a boat, this is one of the little creations I've come up with to make it a little bit easier to light my very odd fire, where I take a fire lighter and stick a match into it like that, so that then I can use the fire tongs to drop it down and place it with, when we look through the ashtray, the match poking through, so I know exactly where the fire lighter is and exactly where I need to light it. In fact, I can just light the end of the match, which obviously then burns up to the fire lighter, and of course then ignites the fire lighter itself, hopefully then igniting the wood. So as the fire starts to get underway properly and warm us up a little bit, let's just take a moment to talk about one of the important things to do with the fire, actually getting fuel to go inside it. Now, before you head out there with your saw and your axe to a lovely wooded area like this, it's important to remember that you don't actually have a legal right in the UK to just go out and collect firewood. It all technically belongs to somebody, whether that's the tree growing or dead wood on the ground, so it's technically an act of theft. So that's something to bear in mind no matter how many people you see out there collecting wood, whether from boats or houses, and you certainly see a lot of all types of people out there. Anyway, this is something that I will point out. This area here is where earlier in the video you saw all of the trees that had come down in the snow over the canal. And when the people associated with the Canal and River Trust came up here cutting and clearing those trees, they left all of the wood in nice cut piles along the canal here so that people could come along and collect wood on their boats. And obviously it's a very handy thing for them personally to not have to be thinking, right, we've got all of this wood cut, where are we going to put it? As you can see, it's very much autumn when you get a leaf come up onto the camera itself falling from a tree. But that's something to consider and something to think about. And for me personally, I'm exceptionally lucky when it comes to collecting wood, that I have a landscape gardener in the family. And as you can imagine, somebody whose job is literally involving chainsaws and cutting down trees with masks and face guards such as this, I do have a great access to a huge amount of firewood. Similarly, since moving on board, I found that all of my friends and family friends who I don't even really know that well have become very generous when they're doing work in the garden or work in the house even, with all of the excess wood that they create. Their first thing is, Dan might want this, rather than take it down to the tip, which obviously for them to just put it in bags and then have me and my granddad go around and collect it is absolutely perfect. One of my favourite videos and favourite little moments of boat life from 2014 is this, what you're seeing on the screen now, which basically was me going down the canal on a misty day in the kayak to collect a couple of bags of wood from my granddad, who was dropping it off just at a local car park. And how fantastic a way to keep yourself warm is that? I'm not sure how officially endorsed it was, but last year this area was swarmed upon by a huge amount of people as a huge amount of trees were all cut down with lots of offcuts left lying around. If you wish, you can head up to the shops, grab a load of bags and nets of coal and kindling sticks and logs and all the rest of it, fetch them down to your boat, and there you are. You've got your ready-made fire fuel source all in one go. Apart from the obvious sticks and wood and things like that you can burn in the fire, there's a lot of sort of artificial things being created these days, such as stuff like these heat logs, which I'm a big fan of because they do throw out an awful lot of heat. Now, there's some brands that you may see, and in various shops, something like this can cost you £3 to £4, or you can be like me and many other people and find these for 99p or £1 for various other brands at various other shops in the UK. I think anybody who's familiar will know where I'm talking about. But basically, something like that is just, don't know whether it's compressed sawdust or something of that nature. So basically, it burns very well, and you can just light the packet. Well, obviously, put it in the fire, and then I like to light everything from underneath to stop the smoke coming up into the boat. But basically, light the packaging and away you go. And one of those will burn in my little fire with the airflow down really low for a long time and get it so hot on here that you have to start opening the windows and opening the doors to let some of the extra heat out. Personally, I try and only burn wood during the daytime because as I'm up and about on the boat anyway, I don't mind having to go back to the fire every so often and stoke it up and put a little bit more fuel in it. And then over the evenings and nights, that's when I start to put the coal in, which will then hopefully last a lot longer and last through to the morning. It doesn't always last and it gets very chilly sometimes, but it's all part of it. And at the end of the day, that's what my life on board a narrowboat is all about. Taking things as they come and trying to make the most out of every situation you find yourself dealt with. As you can see, a day like today where it's absolutely perfect and we've got that cow once again beating us in a race down the canal. Equally, you've also got moments where you might be tucked up in bed with rain hammering on the roof and the fire roaring at your side, thinking, this is the life, this is everything that I could have ever asked for. But sometimes I've found myself having fallen off my bike early in the morning on the morning ice, freezing cold and with bruised legs and knees, and thinking, yeah, this isn't quite how I envisioned life going, but you've just got to get back up, hope that you're still in one piece, and carry on living the dream. Until the next time, I would like to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for all of the amazing support that my videos have had over this year. I'd like to say as well that I know this video's been a much more basic, less edited version, but the weather really wasn't playing ball and there was an awful lot of information to try and cover in this. I haven't covered half of it, I know, but hopefully it's been useful and interesting and given you a few things to think about. If you'd like to support me, then please feel free to click that subscribe button and even spread the word. Similarly, if you'd really like to support me more, then please consider checking out my books for the Kindle. Only £1.53 each. The Narrowboat Lad was the first book that I ever wrote about my first year on board a narrowboat. I hope that you'll enjoy it. But until the next time, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for watching this far into this video. Have a fantastic day. Keep it boat worthy and farewell.